This season features new twists on traditional techniques. Hi, I'm Katie Hacker, and with me is sleepless beater Leslie Rogowski. Welcome, Leslie.
Hi, Katie. It's great to be here again.
So glad to have you. And today you're going to show us some great tips for using the loom.
That's right.
So getting started and finishing and a lot of stuff in between too.
There's a lot to know. It's a really old technique. It goes back to the 1600s as a Native American tradition. So this is a really close example, this loom that I'm going to show you, to the models that were used even by the ancient Native Americans. It's very cool.
That is, and you know, this whole season we're talking about using traditional techniques and putting your own contemporary twist, so this is perfect.
So let me show you how easy this is to start. We have the base of the loom, which has little grooves I'm going to call the warp coil, and a bar. And the most important thing about weaving on a loom is to create tension for the threads that we're going to string this way, which are called the warp threads. And the way this works is you'll see that there's two little holes and a bar, and you stick the bar in and you're going to bend the loom by holding it against something and just put that little bar in. So it does rock, but that's not going to impede your loom movement. Now we're going to string the warp. You want to work from a spool of thread. I'm using thermally bonded beading thread. It's real important to use a thread for your warp that doesn't have a lot of stretch to it, because what can happen is as you're working, it'll do what's called growing, and it'll stretch.
Oh, yeah, you don't want that.
No, you don't want that. Now on the reverse side of this cleverly made modern replica here, you'll see two buttons. And I'm going to start, again, I'm not cutting anything from my thread. I'm going to just take the thread and knot it around one of these buttons in just a simple square knot. And you don't need to leave a big tail.
Okay. So you're just fastening it onto
So I'm just
your loom.
fastening it onto the loom with one end. Whoops. I'm just tying that square knot.
Okay.
All right, so you're going to do that, and you're going to tie that securely and give it a tug and make sure that that knot is not going to slip. Then you're going to turn the loom over, and now, depending on the width of the cuff, you're going to pull with a nice tension, kind of keep it snug in your fingers, put it in one of those grooves, and bring it straight down. I'm not OCD enough to count over, but those of you that are, I have no judgment there. Then you're going to come around and just wrap it around the little peg on the bottom and bring it up into the next coil, and keep doing that across the loom, around the back, and back and forth like this. Now, one thing I want to say is the spacing on this particular loom, each of those little grooves, is sized for a size 11 seed bead. It can be a cylinder seed bead, it can be a check, it can be a Japanese, a regular, round seed bead, or another bead in a different size. You always want to string one more warp thread than a number of beads, because the beads are going to fit in between those warp threads. So I'm going to finish up here, and I'm just going to do a very short little warp. I have 4 threads. I'm just going to do 3 beads. And I'm just going to take this now and wrap it a couple times around the peg, take my scissors, snip it off, leaving me enough to tie a knot on that little tail from the beginning. Okay, so let's do that. And you want to pull that really, really tight. But that's not the whole secret to this great tension. So now we have that, and it's still pretty tight, but what we're going to do is remove the bar, and the loom, which is bowed, is going to open up just enough. It's going to give you the perfect tension. I hold it against myself because I'm going to need to bend it in just a little bit and wiggle that bar out. And now we have this set up.
So now your warp threads are really tight.
So they're really tight. You can't play a tune on it,
There
but
you go.
there you go, right? And that's just totally the most critical. So now let's get started in showing just to weave a little row. Remember I said 4 warp threads, so 3 beads. To start, it doesn't matter whether you start here and weave this way away from you, or start up here and weave this way, whatever is comfortable for you. And depending on whether you're right-handed or left-handed, you're going to start at a different place. My dominant hand is right, so I'm going to make a knot, a little half hitch around the edge thread on the left. I'm going to really work from right to left and left to right in a certain way that's going to be different if somebody is a lefty. I'm tying just a little half hitch. Now I'm going to bring my working thread and needle under the warp thread. And this is important too. You want to make sure that you start under the warp thread, and we're going to string 3 beads. I'm working with size 10 cylinder beads, so they're easy to see, and they will fit in these grooves with just the one spacing. Now I have the beads underneath. I'm going to pop them up with my finger in between the warp threads there. Now I'm going to pushing up, I'm actually holding the warp thread with my thumb and pushing up with my other finger. I'm going to pass my needle back through those beads so the thread is sandwiching the beads on the warp thread.
Yeah, you know, you're really creating a piece of beaded fabric here.
That's exactly it. It is a piece of beaded fabric. And you'll notice, speaking of fabric, that you're not going in and out. So you're going to just go past through like this, and it's there. Bring your warp thread, working thread under, pick up the next row, go through. That's all there is to weaving on a loom.
It's so simple, and it's meditative too, going back and forth.
Very much.
Very calming.
Yep.
Okay, so when we're ready to take this off, once we've woven our piece, what do we do next?
Okay, one of the most traditional, I'm going to bring this out of the way.
Sure, I'll move it over here.
Okay. Here I have a piece that's strung. We're going to cut it from the loom, and the traditional way is to take each of these warp threads, string them one by one on a needle, and weave them back into the piece. So I'm going to cut this from the loom and thread one thread and show you how you do that.
Okay.
I'm going to turn my loom over. Now here's a word of warning, because there's tension on this. When you cut those threads, this thing is going to just pop open.
Right.
It won't hurt you or anything like that, but
It is a little shocking.
it is a little shocking. So you can actually, again, hold it against yourself just to help control that. And I'm just taking a nice snip or shears and cutting the threads close to that little button. And the other side will just cut off to make things easy here. And you're going to have to cut those loops because, remember, each of these ends is going to be threaded on a needle, so you can't have any loops. Remember, we looped around the pegs on the other side. All right, so I'm going to cut them to a reasonable length, still allowing myself enough ease to thread it on a needle and weave it into my piece. So I'm just going to snip these off. There we go. And I'm going to work from the center out.
Oh, okay.
Now, and it doesn't really have to be exact center, but I'm going to work from the center out. I'm going to take one thread to show you how this is done. I'm going to thread it on my needle. So the needle threading tip is to pull the thread as small as possible between your thumb and forefinger, like a poppy seed, and bring the eye of the needle down. And there we go. So I have one of my warp threads threaded on the needle, and I'll pull that through a little bit. Now, we're going to weave this thread in and out in an S pattern, row by row, lengthwise this way. So I have the thread, and I'm going to come into this blue bead in the second row and pull it through like this. And now you're going to go the other way. And I've switched hands, you'll notice, but you can turn the piece around. And I'm going back the other way. And you're going to continue just doing that. Do you see how that's going in and out? And you're going to do that for maybe 5 or 6 rows. And then you're going to trim it, and you're going to start again, and you're going to thread the needle on each one at a time.
Okay, so that would be any time that you want that clean finished edge.
That's correct. And I'll show you in a little bit some of the other way. Once you've done that, there's lots of things that you can do with that kind of a clean edge.
Okay, so let's move this one.
Okay. The next technique that I want to show you for finishing creates a selvage edge for use with a crimp clasp, a ribbon crimp, which is fast and easy. So if you look up at this end, you'll see that I have an edge already woven. And here you're going to mimic fabric weaving because you are going to take your working thread and go in and out, back and forth to create that little selvage. So you literally are going under, over, under, over, under, over, like this, and pulling it through and pushing it down to the beadwork. And just remember, if you've come out over, you're going to start under, over, under, over, like this. And you're going to do that for maybe 6 or 7 rows to see how snug it is. And then when you're all finished, you're going to tie a little half hitch. If we go back to the other end of my beadwork here, you can see there's a little knot. You're going to apply glue. You can take a nice glue that's going to absorb into the thread, nothing too viscous here, nothing too thick. You want something, a stringing glue that's liquid, and you're going to let it dry. So I've brought a piece that's already done to.
Okay.
And you can see that I have the selvage here that hasn't been glued yet, and here's an end that's been glued, solid, dried, and you can see that I've trimmed it very close up to that selvage and it's not going to come undone. Now, this is so easy. All we have to do is take the ribbon crimp, and I should point out that I have sized my piece of beadwork to the clasp because I know that they come in pre-existing sizes. You're going to take the crimp, and you can get it started a little bit with your fingers, and you're just going to take a nylon jaw so you don't bung it up, and you're just going to slam it closed right there.
Okay.
And look how nice and clean that is, and you'll do that to the other side. I want to show you some other ways to finish though, because there's so many creative things you can do. One of my favorite fast, easy ways is to snip the piece from the loom with about 1/2 inch of warp, fold the warp threads in, and literally double-sided tape in a bezel.
Oh, that's so easy.
It's so easy,
It looks
and you
great,
find all these
too.
different bezels. A little more work, but a nice clean finish. You see the red and black choker has also short warp threads that are knotted, and I've hand-stitched a piece of grosgrain ribbon around it and attached a hook and eye.
That looks nice too.
Which is a nice, clean, elegant finish. You can use some of the threads. You see the big piece with the triangles, the colors, that has 2 loops for 2 buttons, and you want to use shank buttons and sew them on like you would in dressmaking. You can use commercial crafts like the film strip. You can see that the toggle clasp is just attached using some warp threads. And the last colorful piece on the board has a slide. I've already finished that with the clean weaving the ends all in for the even finish, and you slide that over the last row.
Okay.
Some of the bracelets, you can use other cords also for the warp, like this one here, which has a slidey thing on
That's a great
wax
idea.
linen, so you can get a little more ethnic look. You have snaps you can use, and you can attach a focal. If you look at this roller here, you can see I have a button on top. It just snaps closed. And then I have brought a necklace with, and you can see how I've used different findings on those warp threads, including making fringe. And the little earrings also make use of the warp threads. You can just use them to sew back in, you string more beads, and you can attach loops or tassels or other things to add a decorative finish. So there's a lot of different ways to play with your beads in creative looming.
Yeah, there are so many ways to finish it.
Tons.
These are great tips. Thank you, Leslie.
Thanks, Katie.